Hi, everybody, and welcome to Quick Takes with the Diverse Learners Cooperative. Today, we're talking about making assignments accessible while still keeping rigor high. If you're unfamiliar with us at the DLC, we are an organization whose mission is to equip and empower teachers and leaders to serve all students. Today's mission is this. By the end of this video, you'll have seen a process in action for making assignments and lessons accessible for diverse learners while you continue to keep the level of rigor high. We'll look at the process overview, do an example, and review a couple of resources. So let's dive right in. The process is just 4 simple steps. The first thing that you're going to do is identify the learning target. After you've done that, you're going to look at it and decide what level of thinking are we requiring of students. Our third step is to identify the student levels in your class. And then we're going to fine-tune the learning target while keeping within the same level of thinking. So we're going to try it with a lesson from Achievement First. This is a 5th grade math lesson, and it's about the order of operations. You can see a little summary here of it, and if you get the slide deck later, you can click on it to look at it. This might be a lesson that some of you are already using, so I'm going to show you how you can continue to teach this same lesson to all of your students, no matter what level they're on, while keeping the rigor for them, the thinking and the ideas that they need to produce the same. So we'll start with the first step in our process, identifying the learning target. So for this lesson, what's the learning target? It says very clearly what we expect students to be able to do, and that is to evaluate numerical expressions, including multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, and grouping symbols by applying the order of operations. And an example of this is here in the exit ticket. And this is the 3rd question. It asks which scholar simplified correctly, justify your response, and then it has 2 examples. So we want students to choose, justify, do all of those things. So we've already identified the learning target. Pretty simple first step. Our next step is to think about the level of thinking that we're asking students to do in this lesson. Where are we asking them to put their brain power? If you look at this one closely, we'll see that the first verb is that students will be able to evaluate. Also in the exit ticket, it has the verb justify. When we think about that, we're going to look at Bloom's taxonomy, the revised version. This is really helpful because it helps think about keeping the rigor the same. So this lesson is about the level of evaluation. We can use the evaluating column on Bloom's to help us know that there are other ways that we can ensure students are still analyzing and looking through the text. No matter what level students are, we're going to ask them to evaluate. Here on this chart, which is from the Vanderbilt Center for Teaching, it identifies evaluation as justifying a stand or decision. Another chart that we find useful is this one here that has it in columns, and it shows us that we are thinking here in the evaluation area. And that's what we want all of our students to do, no matter what their language level is, no matter what their cognitive ability level is, whatever we have students doing, they should be evaluating during this lesson. That will keep this lesson rigorous for them. Then we're going to look at our 3rd step, which is identifying student levels. For this example, I'm looking at student access scores. So I've got a class chart here that's got all of my students in it. And this is a grade level chart. So it's got quite a few students. It's going to help me plan for this whole grade. And when I look at this chart, I think about there's 2 different groups that I have in this grade level. The first group that stands out to me is that I've got a good number of students who are level 1 and level 2. I'm going to push all those together when I'm thinking about my plans and thinking about how can I accommodate this lesson so that these level 1 and 2 students are still evaluating this process and understanding what needs to be done. My second group is going to be this higher group of 3s and 4s. I also want these students to be using the same level of rigor We still want them to be evaluating. And I'm going to think about how can I accommodate this lesson? Is it accessible to them while still being rigorous? So a group of 1s and 2s and a group of 3s and 4s. My last step is to fine-tune the learning target while keeping within the same level of thinking. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do that and what that looks like. So here I have the exit ticket and what we're asking students to do, that we want them to evaluate numerical expressions, and then the example in our exit ticket. So how can I fine tune this? Well, according to Bloom's revised taxonomy, evaluating is when students look at multiple viewpoints or options and can give reasons why one is better than the other. So I'm definitely going to have my students evaluating 2 different pieces. So I'm going to still keep that in there. And we want them to have show their reasons. There's other verbs for evaluating. And in that chart that had the columns, I pulled some of those for you. This is linked at the end of the slide deck as well. But some other verbs for evaluating are things like argue, choose, decide, defend, explain, mark, rate, support. So whatever I'm asking my students to do, it has to be one of these evaluation words. They have to be evaluating, or else we're not asking them to do the same level of work that we're asking their peers to do. So let's think about what this could look like. So I'm going to accommodate this exit ticket for my 2 different groups while I keep that evaluation thinking level the same. I'm going to have one example for you for my level 1s and 2s, and one example for my 3s and 4s. So if I look at my level 1s and 2s, these are kind of the things I'm thinking about. I look at this question and I'm thinking, all right, what are some ways that I can support them so that they can access this work here and still continue to evaluate more than just circling the answer? One thing that I'm going to start by doing is I want to highlight the academic vocabulary. So in this example, the word simplified would be highlighted because that's something that we're really talking about in this lesson. I'm going to have students circle the correct work, and then I'm going to put an image in there to show what I'm looking for, and I'll show you what that looks like. Instead of saying the word justify, I'm going to have students choose and mark the places that are incorrect, because I know that those are words that are also asking students to still evaluate. I'm also going to provide a sentence frame for the writing portion, because my students that are level 1s and 2s may not quite realize that when I ask them to justify their answer, that they're being asked to write something. So this is what it could look like. Which scholar simplified correctly? And I've highlighted simplified or bolded simplified so they know that that's a really key word that we have focused on. I made a circle around the word choose because I want them to circle the work where the scholar made the incorrect mistake. And we want to highlight the places where the incorrect scholar made a mistake. So I have both of those examples here. And then in the sentence frame, I also matched those same accommodations. So they know that whoever they chose correctly, their name goes in that oval. And then in my sentence frame, blank simplified the work correctly, blank was incorrect when they did what? Whatever they highlighted, those pieces that were incorrect, that's what they're going to put there. And then because blank, and hopefully they'll be able to pull from their understanding of order of operations to fill that in correctly. So this is the same question. It's the same level of rigor. They're still evaluating these students' work, and they're still justifying their response, providing examples in specific ways of how that student was correct or incorrect. So this is a lot of work. For my level 1 and 2 students, it's a high level of thinking, because we know that that's pretty high on the Bloom's revised taxonomy, but it's not a lot of work for me. It didn't take very long. Once I got into the process and thought about what my students needed, I could easily do this, and their work looks very similar to the student next to them. Let's look at my group 3 and 4 and see how we would do something similar for them. On this one, I'm going to be thinking a little bit more about how these students are moving towards proficiency in English. So they're gonna need a little bit less of the same visuals and that sort of thing, but they are gonna need something different than maybe what's here. So this is kind of how I'm thinking for these students. I'm going to continue to highlight the academic vocabulary because that's often something that these students might be missing. I'm also going to have students circle the correct work and put an image there to show it, just like I did previously. I'm going to leave the word justify, but I'm going to elaborate. So I'm going to say something like justify your response by marking the places the scholar got incorrect, showing what they would have done. Then I'm going to provide them a sentence starter for the writing portion, which is a little bit different than a sentence frame. It asks them to do a little bit more of the heavy lifting, but it's still there for them to get them started. It might look like this. Oh, there it is. Which scholar simplified correctly? So you see I've highlighted that. Justify your response by marking the places the scholar was incorrect, showing what they should have done. So they're going to read this question. They're going to know that they need to identify which one was correct, which one was incorrect. And then I have 2 sentence starters for them. Blank simplified the work correctly because, and then my second part is instead of blank, they should have blank. And it's not giving them any of the answers. It is guiding them to solve all parts of the problem, which continues to keep them at the same level of rigor as their peers. They're still evaluating what happened here in this work. That's what we're grading. And so I can look at this student's work or my level 1s and 2s on their problem, and I will know if they understand the learning target, which is, can they look at these 2 pieces and decide which one used the order of operations correctly? So that's the process. We're going to identify the learning target, decide what level of thinking is required of students. We're going to identify the student levels, and then we're going to fine-tune that learning target while still keeping the same level of thinking. If you get the slide deck, you can click on these different images to help you get started on some of these processes. So the first one on the left is Vanderbilt Center for Teaching, and it's got their Bloom's taxonomy guide. It's a great breakdown of what it looks like. Bloom's has been revised in the last 20 years, and so it looks at the 2 different versions. The middle sheet is a great cheat sheet to keep by that I always use when I'm planning to look at what are some other words for this level of thinking. And that helps me accommodate some of my materials, especially when I'm thinking about some of my students who are in newer proficiency levels. And then my final things on the right are the WIDA performance definitions. There's 2 different links there. These are great if you're just trying to figure out maybe what might be appropriate for different students. It gives you some really clear guidelines on what students can do at each level with academic language, whether they're taking in information through listening and reading, or if they're producing language through speaking and writing. So there you have it. There is a process for making your work for all students accessible while still keeping the level of rigor high. Thank you so much for joining me today. Check out our upcoming intensives and our other offerings on our website at thediverselearnerscoop.com. If you ever have questions, you can always find me. My email is mary@diverselearnerscoop.com. Thank you so much.